My fiancée told me, marriage feels like a trap right now. I'm not ready. I respected her decision and canceled everything quietly. Months later, she reached out after seeing me move forward without hesitation, but by then it was too late. Marriage feels like a trap right now. She said it the same way someone says they don't feel like pizza tonight. Casual, clean, no trembling voice, no tears, no long build-up. Just Monroe sitting across from me at our kitchen table, both hands wrapped around her coffee mug, eyes somewhere between tired and distant. And that phrase just landed, right in the center of everything we had built. I remember the exact sound the refrigerator made in the silence that followed. That low mechanical hum. I remember thinking, that's the loudest sound I've ever heard. Because what she actually said, without saying it, was, you feel like a trap. Not marriage. Me. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I didn't ask her to explain what she meant because I already understood every single word of it. I just set down my own mug slowly and nodded once. Like I was agreeing to a change in dinner plans. And the thing that nobody tells you about moments like that? The quiet ones. The ones without screaming or throwing things. Those are actually the ones that break something in you permanently. I didn't know it yet. But that morning, that one quiet nod, that was the beginning of the end of who I used to be. And what happened after that silence spread out between us and took root? Neither of us was ready for it. Especially her. Let me tell you what was sitting on the table when she said those words. Not just the coffee mugs. A venue deposit. Non-refundable. $11,000 we had split down the middle. A guest list with 214 names on it. Her mother had already bought her dress. My grandmother had already bought her plane ticket from Portland. We had tastings scheduled, a florist confirmed, a photographer who had blocked off his entire weekend 7 months from that morning. We had an apartment lease that ended in June because we were supposed to be moving into our first house together in May. A house. We had a house picked out. We had walked through it twice. She had already decided which room would be her studio. I had already measured the garage twice because I had plans for a workshop space. We were 31 days away from signing the mortgage paperwork. And we were 4 months and 18 days away from standing at that venue and saying things in front of 214 people that apparently, as of that Tuesday morning, she wasn't sure she wanted to say. I had a ring on the table between us two. Not literally, but figuratively. Everything we were. Everything we had decided together. All of it was sitting right there, and she looked at it and said it felt like a trap. I didn't realize it then, but that moment changed everything. Not just for us, for who I would become after. If you enjoy real stories like this, subscribe, because what happened next changed everything for me. I'm 33. Monroe and I had been together for 3 years and 4 months when she said what she said. We met at a mutual friend's birthday dinner in the West Village, argued about something stupid in the first 20 minutes, and somehow ended up talking for 6 straight hours after everyone else went home. That was Monroe. Magnetic when she wanted to be. I need to back up. Because to understand that Tuesday morning, you need to understand the 6 months leading up to it. The 6 months where things were fine on paper, but something felt slightly off-center. I couldn't name it. I kept trying. Monroe started picking up extra projects at work around November. She's a set designer, good at it, genuinely talented, and there was a production company that had been chasing her for a while. She started saying yes to things she used to say no to. Late nights, weekend site visits, dinner meetings that ran past 10. I told myself it was just a busy season. I told myself she was building her career, and that was a good thing. And it was. It genuinely was. But somewhere in there, a small voice in the back of my head started noticing things. The way she'd come home and sit with her phone for 40 minutes before actually being present in the room with me. The way she stopped asking about my day. Not dramatically, not in a fight, just quietly stopped. The way she changed the subject the 2 times I brought up the seating chart. The way she went to her sister's for a whole weekend and came back seeming lighter somehow. And when I asked if everything was okay, she said yes too fast. I noticed. I just didn't want to be the guy who pushed. So I didn't. I carried the wedding planning almost entirely by myself those last 2 months. Confirmed the catering. Followed up with the photographer. Handled the invitation printing when the first batch came back with a typo. I thought I was being supportive. I thought I was picking up the slack while she was busy. I didn't consider that maybe she wasn't picking up her half because she was having a much harder conversation with herself than she was having with me. My best friend, Grayson, noticed before I did. We were at his place watching a game one Sunday afternoon, and out of nowhere he just said it. She excited about the wedding? I said yeah. He said, when's the last time she brought it up on her own? I started to answer. And then I realized I didn't have one. I changed the subject. I should have sat with that question longer. I should have let it settle somewhere honest inside me, and then gone home and actually talked to Monroe. But I didn't, because some part of me already suspected the answer, and I wasn't ready to hear it. So I let another 3 weeks go by, and then came that Tuesday morning. She had been awake before me. That was unusual. I came downstairs, and she was already at the kitchen table. No music, no podcast, just sitting. And the second I saw her face, something in my chest tightened. She looked like someone who had made a decision and was trying to figure out how to carry it through the door. I poured my coffee. I sat down. I looked at her, and I said, "Hey." She looked at me for a long moment. And then she said it. "Marriage feels like a trap right now. I'm not ready." 7 words that rewrote everything. I set my mug down. I breathed. I looked at her face and I said, "Okay." Just that. "Okay." She blinked. I think she expected an argument. Or tears. Or for me to start asking the 1,000 questions that were obviously lined up inside my chest like dominoes. But I didn't ask any of them. Because here's the thing. When someone tells you that committing their life to you feels like a trap, there's no version of that conversation where you argue your way to a yes. There's no version where you convince them out of it. If she got to the altar feeling trapped and married me anyway, what would that have looked like in 2 years? 5 years? What would that have done to both of us? So I said okay. And then I asked one question. Just one. Is this about the wedding, or is this about us? She was quiet for too long. And that long quiet was its own answer. She finally said, "I think I need some space to figure that out." I nodded. I stood up. I took my coffee to the living room. I sat on the couch and looked at the wall for about 20 minutes. And then I picked up my phone and started making calls. The venue first. I asked about the cancellation policy. I already knew the deposit was gone. That was in the contract. But I asked anyway because I needed to hear someone say something practical and manageable. The woman on the phone was kind about it. She had probably made this call before. I thanked her. Then I called the caterer. Then the florist. Then the photographer, who, to his credit, offered to return half his deposit if we gave him enough notice for the date. I told him to keep it. He had blocked off his calendar. That wasn't his fault. I called my grandmother in Portland. That was the hardest call. She had her ticket already. She asked me once if I was all right. I said yes. She didn't push. She just said, "Okay, sweetheart. You know what you're doing." I don't know if I believed that, but I held on to it. I didn't post anything on social media. I didn't text the group chats. I just quietly started pulling the threads out one by one. Monroe was in the bedroom. I don't know what she was doing in there. Maybe she was on the phone with her sister. Maybe she was crying. Maybe she was relieved. I told myself it didn't matter right now. By the time I'd made all the calls I needed to make that morning, I had a clear enough picture. The venue deposit was gone. Everything else could be untangled with enough time and patience. The house was the complicated part. We hadn't signed yet. I called the agent, told him we needed to pause. He asked a few questions and then said he understood. I hung up and sat back down on the couch. The apartment felt different already, like the square footage had expanded or contracted. I couldn't tell which. Grayson texted me around noon. "You good?" I stared at the message for a while. Then I just typed back, "Yeah, big day. Tell you later." He sent a thumbs up. He knew me well enough not to push. Monroe came out of the bedroom around 2 in the afternoon. She looked like she had been crying, but her face was composed now. She said, "I'm going to stay at Arden's for a bit." Her best friend. I said, "That's fine." She looked at me like she was trying to read something in my face. I kept it neutral. She started moving around the apartment, gathering things. A bag. Her laptop. Her skincare stuff. The plant she had named Theodore. She picked up Theodore and then looked at me again. She said, "I'm sorry." I said, "I know." She said, "I don't mean it as. I'm not trying to hurt you." I said, "I know, Monroe." Something moved across her face that I couldn't fully identify. She nodded once and left. I listened to the elevator go down in the hallway. And then I sat in the silence of that apartment for a long time, until it started to feel less like a wound and more like just a room. I met Grayson for drinks that Friday. I told him everything. He listened all the way through without interrupting. That's something I've always appreciated about him. He lets you finish. When I was done, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How do you feel? Not what are you going to do? Not I told you so. Just how do you feel?" I thought about it honestly. Like I dodged something, I said. And like I lost everything at the same time. Both of those things are true. He nodded. Then he said something I've thought about many times since. "You know what I think? I think she was more honest with herself than most people are." That's not nothing. I looked at him. He said, That doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. Doesn't mean you didn't deserve better communication before it got this far. But she told you the truth before it was too late. That's actually rare. I thought about that. I thought about all the people who get to the altar and stand there and say the words anyway, feeling exactly what Monroe felt, and just swallow it, and then spend years slowly unswallowing it. In divorce attorneys' offices, or in the quiet resentment of a house where two people stopped reaching for each other. I still canceled everything, I said. I know, he said. And that took something. Not really, I said. It was just the right thing to do. And I meant it. There was no version of me that was going to drag Monroe to an altar she didn't want to be at, even when it destroyed something I had spent years building toward. That wasn't love. That would have been ego wearing love's clothes. I finished my drink, and somewhere in that conversation, without making a big declaration about it, I decided something. I was going to be okay. Not because I was over it. Not because it didn't matter. But because falling apart wasn't going to change anything. And I had a life to get back to. I started with the apartment. Monroe's stuff was mostly gone, but her absence was everywhere. The empty shelf in the bathroom. The hook by the door where her coat used to hang. The space on the bookshelf where Theodore used to sit. I rearranged things. Not dramatically. Just enough to make the rooms feel like mine again. Not like the leftover version of something that used to be ours. I started cooking again. I had stopped without noticing. When you're in a relationship for 3 years, you stop cooking for yourself. You cook for two. And when the two becomes one, there's this strange moment in the kitchen where you realize you don't know what you want to eat. Only what you would have made for her. It took a few weeks to figure that out again. But I did. I got back to the gym. Not in the obsessive, anger-fueled way. Just consistently. For mornings a week. Showing up because structure was the first thing I needed, and I knew it. I went back to a woodworking project I had abandoned 8 months ago. A workbench for the garage of a house I was no longer buying. I set it up in the corner of the living room instead. It looked ridiculous. Grayson came over and laughed at it for 5 solid minutes. I laughed too. It was the first time I had laughed since that Tuesday morning. Felt strange in my throat. Good strange. I started sleeping properly again around week 3. Not great, but properly. That mattered more than I expected. Work helped. I'm an architectural consultant, mostly commercial projects, the occasional residential job. I had a mixed-use development proposal sitting on my desk that I'd been giving half my focus for weeks. I gave it my full focus now. There was something almost meditative about having a complex problem to solve that had nothing to do with my personal life. I stayed late a few nights. Not to avoid going home, just because the work was actually good and I was actually in it. My boss, Sterling, noticed. He stopped by my desk one afternoon and said, "Whatever's going on with you lately, it's working." I told him I just cleared some headspace. He nodded like he understood more than he was going to ask about. Monroe texted twice in the first month. Once to ask how I was. I said fine. Once to say she was thinking about me. I said thank you. Short. Civil. No invitation to open a door I had decided to leave closed for now. I wasn't cold. I was just deliberate. Because I know myself. And I know that if I had started talking to her, something in me would have still been waiting at that table. Waiting for her to come back. And I couldn't build anything real from behind a wall of waiting. So I answered. Briefly. And then I kept moving. About 6 weeks after Monroe left, Grayson pulled me into going to a gallery opening in Tribeca. I didn't want to go. I was in a hoodie on my couch with the workbench project and a half-eaten bowl of pasta. He showed up at my door anyway. "You're going," he said. "I'm not ready to." "It's a gallery opening, not a date," he said. "Get a jacket." I went. The gallery was showing a collection of architectural photography, bridges, mostly, structural work, which is why Grayson knew I'd actually like it once I stopped resisting. He knows me better than almost anyone. About an hour in, I was standing in front of a photograph of the Williamsburg Bridge shot from directly underneath, that angle where the steel geometry becomes almost abstract, and someone stepped up beside me and said, "It looks like it's alive." I glanced over. She was looking at the photograph, not at me. "The structure?" I asked. "The tension," she said. "All those cables. It's holding so much together, and you can feel it. Like it's working." I looked back at the photo. She wasn't wrong. Her name was Fallon. She was a structural engineer who had accidentally ended up at an architectural photography show because she had walked in off the street to get out of the rain and stayed because it turned out to be actually interesting. We talked about the photographs for 40 minutes. Then Grayson materialized at my elbow, assessed the situation in about 3 seconds, made a flimsy excuse about needing to get home, and disappeared. Fallon and I ended up at a coffee place down the street for another 2 hours. I didn't think about Monroe once. Not until I was walking home and realized I hadn't. And the realization didn't make me feel guilty. It made me feel something more complicated, like a door opening in a room I had assumed was permanently sealed. I texted Grayson when I got home. He wrote back, "Finally. I want to be clear about something. What happened with Fallon wasn't fast. I wasn't using her to get over Monroe. I wasn't performing some version of moving on to make a point to anyone. I wasn't ready to fall into something new, but I was ready to be open. There's a difference." Fallon was direct and sharp and funny in a way that caught you off guard. She had strong opinions about load-bearing structures and very little patience for pretension. She liked old diners, terrible action films, and was in the middle of building her own kayak in her apartment. A kayak? In her apartment. In Brooklyn. She showed me a photo of it on our second time getting coffee. It was occupying her entire living room. "Is that a problem?" she asked. "Only if you want to keep the living room," I said. She smiled and said, "I don't need the living room. I need the kayak." That was Fallon. I liked her. Not in the way you like someone when you're lonely and they're available. In the way you like someone when they say a specific thing and something real responds to it in you. We kept it slow. Easy. No declarations. No rushing. Just two people who found each other's company genuinely worth having. And slowly, quietly, something started to shift in me. The apartment stopped feeling like the leftover of something lost. It started feeling like the beginning of something else. Around month 3, Monroe's best friend Arden texted me. I hadn't spoken to Arden directly since everything fell apart. She and I had always gotten along. She was practical and kind, and she had always treated me well. She asked if she could call. I said sure. She was quiet for a second when I picked up, and then she said, "I need to tell you something. Monroe would be upset with me, but I think you deserve to know." I said okay. She wasn't just unsure about the wedding, Arden said. There was someone from her production company. It wasn't physical, but it was close to being something, and she knew it, and it scared her. And instead of dealing with that honestly, she convinced herself the problem was the marriage. I sat with that. She ended it, Arden said. Whatever it almost was. But by then she'd already told you what she told you. I didn't say anything for a moment. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because she's been asking about you," Arden said. "And I don't think that's fair unless you have the full picture." I thanked her. I sat with it for a long time after we hung up. And the strange thing? It didn't change how I felt about what I had done. I had made the right call. Because even in a version of that story where the near thing with the other person never happened, Monroe still sat across from me and told me I felt like a trap. That was still true. That still would have been there. The other information just reframed the picture. It explained the distance. The half-presence. The way she came back from her sisters that weekend seeming lighter. Like someone who had made a decision about something I wasn't part of. It made sense of things I had quietly wondered about. And it made me realize that the problem had never been the wedding. It had been a version of her that had started living slightly outside of us without telling me. I didn't feel angry. I felt clear. I don't know exactly what Monroe saw or when she saw it. She and I had no mutual social media. But Grayson and Monroe followed each other on Instagram. And Grayson is not a private person. He posted from the gallery opening. He posted from a dinner where I happened to be in the background next to Fallon. He posted from a group hike upstate where Fallon was very much in the foreground. I'm not on Instagram much. I didn't know what he was posting in real time. I just know that about 3 months after she left, at the point where I had canceled every last detail of our wedding, renegotiated my apartment lease, returned the engagement ring to the jeweler, gotten back almost nothing for it, but done it anyway, and was genuinely in the middle of building something real with Fallon, Monroe called. Not texted. Called. I looked at the name on my screen for a moment, and then I answered. "Hey," I said. She said hi. Pause. "Is this okay?" "Sure," I said. Another pause. "You seem..." She started, then stopped. "Grayson posts a lot." I said, "Yeah, he does." She laughed a little. It sounded like it cost her something. "You look good," she said. "In the photos." "Thanks, Monroe." Silence. "Are you seeing someone?" she asked. I didn't lie. "I'm spending time with someone," I said. "Yes." She was quiet. Then she said, "I think I made a mistake." And there it was. The sentence I think some part of me had been waiting for, even after I had stopped waiting for it. It's a strange thing, hearing those words. Because you spend weeks telling yourself not to wait for them. And then they arrive. And you realize they got here too late. Not because you planned it that way. Not as some elaborate revenge. Just because time is not a reversible thing. You cancel the venue. You call the caterer. You rearrange the apartment. You show up to a gallery in Tribeca because your best friend drags you off the couch. You talk about the tension in suspension bridges with someone who walked in from the rain. You have coffee twice, then 3 times, then dinner, then a Sunday morning walk along the water with someone whose laugh catches you off guard. And one day you realize you're not walking back from something anymore. You're walking towards something. And that is not a reversible thing. I said, "Tell me what you mean." She said, "I think I panicked. About everything. The wedding, the house, what my life was supposed to look like. I couldn't breathe. And I didn't handle it right." "No," I said. "You didn't." She said, "I know." I said, "Monroe, you told me I felt like a trap." "I know. That's not something I can unhear." She said, "I didn't mean it the way it came out." I waited. She said, I felt trapped by my own fear. Not by you." "Okay," I said. "But when you feel that fear and you're sitting across from me and you say those words, that's still the thing that happened. The fear was yours. The words landed on me." She was quiet. I said, "And you didn't come to me with the fear. You didn't say I'm scared and I need us to talk about it. You sat on it. For months. And while you were sitting on it, I was planning a wedding by myself and wondering why things felt slightly wrong and deciding not to push." "I know," she said quietly. "I know you know," I said. "I'm not saying it to make you feel bad. I'm saying it because I need you to understand that what happened had real costs. Not just the deposit. Not just the logistical stuff. Me. It cost something real in me." Silence. "Are you happy?" she asked. I thought about that honestly. "I'm getting there," I said. "Yeah, I think I actually am." She said, "Good." And I believed she meant it. "Does she make you happy?" I said, "She makes things feel easy in a way I didn't realize things could feel." Monroe was quiet for a long time after that. Then she said, "I'm sorry. For all of it." I said, "I know, Monroe. I forgive you. I mean that." "But," she said, "but I'm not coming back," I said. "Not because I'm angry. Not because I want to punish you. But because what I have right now is built on a foundation that doesn't have cracks in it. And I'm not going to leave that." She said, "I understand." I said, "I hope you figure it out. I genuinely mean that too." "I know you do," she said. We said goodbye. I sat on my couch and looked at the workbench in the corner of the living room for a while. Then I picked up my phone and texted Fallon. "Dinner tomorrow?" She wrote back in about 2 minutes. "Yes, but I'm choosing the diner. You always try to go somewhere fancy." I smiled. In the weeks after that call, I thought a lot about the story Arden had told me, and I realized something. Monroe's situation was more human than it was villainous. She had gotten close to something that scared her. Instead of dealing with it directly, she turned the fear sideways and called it the marriage. Called it me. That's not uniquely monstrous. That's what people do when they haven't yet learned how to carry something uncomfortable in their hands long enough to look at it clearly. You name it something else. You externalize it. You say the cage is outside when the cage was always inside. I had done smaller versions of that in my own life. Most people have. But here's where I stopped being generous. Not with what she felt. With the silence. 3 years of building something together, and she had a fear she couldn't bring me. That's the part that cost us. Not the feeling. The withholding. Because if she had come to me, really come to me, and said, "I'm scared of this. I'm not sure I can breathe. Something feels wrong and I don't know if it's us or me," I would have sat down with her. We would have figured it out together, or we would have figured out that we couldn't. Either way, honestly. Either way, together. But she chose the silence. And silence, eventually, becomes its own decision. I didn't hate her for it. But I also stopped carrying any guilt about moving forward without her. Because I had always been available for the honest conversation. She just never gave us the chance to have it. Fallon and I had our first actual disagreement about 8 months in. It was small, and then it was suddenly not small. We were talking about whether to tell people how we met. She found the walked in from the rain during a gallery opening story slightly embarrassing, which I personally found hilarious. We were laughing about it. And then somehow, from inside the laughing, she said, "You don't have to make it into a story, you know. Not everything needs to be a narrative." And I said, "I'm not making it into anything. It just is one." And she said, "You do that sometimes. You package things." I paused. "What does that mean?" "I mean," she said, carefully, "you're very good at processing things and organizing them into something that makes sense, which is a strength. But sometimes I wonder if the processing is, if you're fully in the thing while it's happening, or if you're already writing the version of it you'll tell later." That landed in a way I didn't expect. I was quiet for a moment. And then I said, "Tell me if you think that's happening between us." She looked at me. "Is it?" I said. She said, "No, I don't think so. I think when you're here, you're here." I just wanted to say it. "Then say it," I said. "I want to know when something's bothering you. Don't sit on it." She looked at me for a second. Then she said, "Is that about me or is that about Monroe?" I thought about that. "Both," I said honestly. She nodded. "Fair," she said. And that was it. No explosion. No shutdown. No silent drive home. We talked it out. Like two adults who had both been around long enough to know what the alternative looked like. That's when I knew. Not in a lightning bolt, movie moment way. Just in the quiet certainty of watching someone meet you in the middle without being asked. That's when I knew what this was. A year after Monroe sat across from me at the kitchen table and rewrote everything I thought I knew about my future, I signed a lease on a new apartment. Just mine. Then Fallon and I started talking about eventually, and what eventually looked like, and at what pace. Easy. Unhurried. No spreadsheets. No non-refundable deposits. Just the conversation. Grayson came over when I was setting up the new place. He looked around at the half-assembled shelves and the boxes and the workbench I had dragged from the old apartment and said, "This is very you." I said, "Yeah." He said, "You good?" I said, "Yeah. Actually, yeah." He said, "I mean it. You seem different." I said, "I am different." He said, "Good different or lost something different?" I thought about it. "Both," I said, "but mostly good." He nodded. He helped me put the shelves together. And somewhere in the middle of that, in a half-assembled apartment in the city I love, I realized something. Monroe hadn't broken me. She had actually, accidentally, done me a significant favor. Because the version of me that would have argued her back to the table, the version that would have pushed or panicked or spent months trying to convince her that her feelings were wrong and her fear was just nerves and everything was going to be fine. That version would have built a marriage on a fissure. And fissure spread. The version of me that just nodded once and started making calls. That version found out who he was without someone else in the equation. Found out he could cook for one. Could show up to a gallery in a hoodie. Could talk about suspension bridges with a stranger who walked in from the rain. Could build something slow and honest and fundamentally sound. Could choose, fully and clearly, without the background noise of something unresolved. That version of me is not the version Monroe was planning a life with. He's better. And Fallon gets him. I think about that sometimes. How strange gratitude is. How it shows up in unexpected places. Monroe called what we had a trap. And maybe, for her it was. But it wasn't a trap she was locked inside of. It was a door she walked through. And on the other side of that door, without meaning to, she set me free. I heard about Monroe through Grayson, occasionally. She was doing well. Took on a major production. Had moved to a new apartment in Astoria. Was seeing someone, eventually. A sound designer named Mercer who apparently also had very strong feelings about theater. I was genuinely glad. Not in a pointed way. Not in the "I hope she sees how fine I am" way. Just genuinely. Because she wasn't a villain. She was a person who got scared and made choices that cost both of us. And she was going to live with the cost of that knowledge. That was enough. I didn't need anything more from her. Not an apology more thorough than the one she'd given. Not a confession. Not her admitting to the full picture. Just the honest goodbye. Which is what we had. That phone call. Brief. Civil. Real. Two people who had once planned a life together acknowledging that the plan had changed and the lives had diverged, and both of those things were true at the same time, without canceling each other out. Fallon met Grayson for the first time about 4 months after the gallery. They were sizing each other up in the polite competitive way that a best friend and a new partner always do. Grayson texted me from the bathroom. "She's the real deal. Don't mess it up." I texted back, "Too busy. She's arguing with me about the diner again." He sent back 3 laughing emojis. That was enough. That was actually everything. People ask me sometimes if I'm bitter, if I resent her, if I wish it had gone differently. And I give the same answer every time. No, not because I'm performing enlightenment. Not because what she did didn't hurt. It did. That Tuesday morning left a mark that took months to stop feeling. But bitterness would have required me to believe that the life I was building with Monroe was the only version of my life worth having. And I don't believe that. I don't believe it because I've seen what the other version looks like. The one I have now. The one where someone sits across from me, not at a kitchen table with their hands wrapped around a mug and something difficult to say, but at a diner booth, arguing about whether to get the eggs or the French toast, completely unaware that just the sound of her insisting she's right about something stupid is the best part of my day. Monroe told me marriage felt like a trap. She wasn't wrong, just not in the way she thought. The trap wasn't the marriage. The trap was staying in a version of my future that had already quietly decided I wasn't necessary to it. Walking out of that trap, even with the deposit gone and the calls made and the boxes moved, was the only move that made sense. And I'd make it again, every single time. The refrigerator was still humming that morning. I just finally stopped pretending I couldn't hear it.